Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 100 Words or Less, the podcast. We're on episode number 33, and happy Thanksgiving. I realized that I didn't say that the last episode, and that was just straight up rude. So I hope you all had a good holiday and you ate good food. I had some amazing veggie lasagna, and yeah, it was just awesome. This was the first year that I really kind of let loose, where I was like, you know what? I don't care how much I eat. I'm gonna have giant slices of vegan apple pie, and that is just what's gonna happen. And it did, and I don't feel terrible about it because, you know, that's just what you do during the holidays. So, anyways, few items of business out of the way, and then we'll start to dig into the show. Propertyofzach.com. I know those of you who've listened to a few episodes realize that I am beating you over the head with this, but there's good reason for it. Now you're going to be starting to see some year-end lists. So, best of 2012 records, all that type of stuff. So go to that site. They've got news, they've got interviews, they've got reviews, and they will have the top 10, 20, 30, bunch of different lists from a bunch of different people. So that way you can catch up on stuff you may have missed or discover things that you never even heard of in the first place. So yeah, go to Property of Zach. Love those dudes. Love Zach. Awesome. Review the show on iTunes. We are getting near the over 100 review mark or star mark, whatever, in the iTunes store. And that's awesome. I love the fact that you guys are very, very nice and decide to review the show. So yeah, do that. Also visit the website, 100wordspodcast.com. Taking a little break from that, but now I'm going to dig back into it and, post the latest and greatest that I find online and music and movies and whatever. And also, I've been having some cool conversations with people that have emailed the show because I really do appreciate anybody reaching out and saying, hey, this is cool. How about you get this guest? Or, hey, I just wanted to say hello. Talking to a dude in Sweden who was basically saying, hey, I really like the show because it keeps me awake when I'm doing the last hour of my shift at night. So yeah, it's just nice to have that sort of interaction with, a dude in Sweden who I had never met before, and now we're bros. So yeah, email the show and we can hang out and talk online, and I'll probably ask you questions about the show and blah, blah, blah. All right, a few other news and notes before we dive into this week's interview with Billy Hamilton from Silverstein. I wanted to say congrats to my friend John Halprin. Went to his wedding recently. He was the second episode of 100 Words or Less. So it was awesome. He had a great wedding, tons of people. It was basically So he used to book at that venue Chain Reaction that a few people have mentioned on this show. And it's, pretty well-known venue here in Southern California. And so basically his wedding was a version of that. So you had people who had played in ska bands, you had people played in hardcore bands, you had people who had played in punk bands, and it was just really funny because you just saw all these different people thrown into the same room for pretty much the same reasons, playing shows. And I always like having those experiences. And so I also, over the past week, there's been a lot on my mind in regards to just kind of the show in general, because there are some other shows that are popping up where I've just discovered that kind of do what this show does and is trying to, accomplish. But because of that, obviously, you feel like, oh, cool. Well, now my format, not like this format's unique, and I've obviously told everybody that I'm basically ripping off what Mark Maron has done with the comedy world, but now I'm trying to apply it to the music / other world, and not obviously get into too much of the entertainment industry because that's kind of what the Nerdist podcast does and whatever. So, the internet's all about niches. And so, yeah, I just feel like I wanted to sort of, put forth a thesis statement. So that way, everybody knows kind of why I do this in the first place, besides my own pure enjoyment. Because essentially, that's why I wanted to do this, because it's really fun for me to not only get to have these experiences with cool people who I respect, or I'm a fan of their music, or a fan of what they do. Um, but then be able to share it with you as well, because I feel like there's obviously lessons to be learned from pretty much everybody that has experienced something, building something from nothing, whether that's putting out a record, whether that's starting a clothing company, whether that's creating a piece of art, whatever the case may be. Um, I just think that there's something to be learned from each person's experience. Um, and I really don't want this show to kind of be like sort of old guy walking down memory lane. Because even though, I mean, I'm 32 years old, and that's not really old, but by definition of punk, hardcore, independent music, whatever you'd like to call it, that is old. Basically, it's a youth culture movement, and a lot of people move on, in their early 20s, and they're like, oh yeah, I don't go to shows anymore, life gets in the way. Like, I totally get that. But I don't want that to be like, oh, the good old days. And it always strikes me about that movie. I'm sure some of you have seen American Hardcore, where you it's a great movie, but at the end of it, you're left with the impression that, well, basically 1984 is when that music scene died, and everything else that came afterwards wasn't as relevant. And I hate that sort of mentality where whatever's happening right now isn't as good as what happened 2 years, 4 years, 10 years, whatever time frame you want to put on it. Because I refuse to believe that. It's just different versions of what has happened before. Obviously, everybody is copying one another at this point, but they're trying to put or their own interpretation of it. Obviously, when bands and artists start, all they're doing is mimicking what has influenced them, and they're wearing their hearts in their sleeves. And only after some time of being able to suck at the beginning, because everybody sucks at the beginning, like that's a reality. If you think you're going to be awesome when you first come out with whatever it is that you're doing, you're delusional or young. Like that's what happens. And only after time are you able to kind of develop your voice and be able to find out what your point of view is and what you're trying to get across. And obviously that sort of evolves. And so, yeah, I don't want this show to be, oh, back in the day, that was really cool. And then obviously only speak to people that are of my age, or, maybe a few years younger. It's like, that's why I wanted to bring on people like, Jamie Morgan from Code Orange Kids. And he was, I'm like almost 12 years older than that guy, if not more. And so just having people that are obviously young, relevant, still touring, doing all that type of stuff, I really want to make sure that that is represented as well. And also, I mean, just for my own sort of self-preservation, I want to stay relevant, and not from a selfish standpoint, but I just want to be active, because this is what I've made my life around: music and everything related to independent music. And so I feel like the more I get involved with various aspects of it, the more relevant I can be, and therefore I feel fulfilled. And I don't feel like a person who's on the outskirts and are like, oh yeah, that dude used to do stuff or whatever. Because as much as you can kind of rest on your laurels, I realize that, the bands I've played in are irrelevant to a lot of people now. And I totally get that. And they are relevant to a certain age group and people that have discovered this music later on. But I'm not going to sit there and be like, oh yeah, like the heyday, like, man, that was my, that's the sort of like the high school football game where I threw 7 touchdowns. I want people to know me from different aspects. And so that's another reason why I wanted to do the show and kind of, showcase all these people's experiences for you. And ultimately, the last thing, and I promise we'll get to the interview, is I want you, the listener, to feel like you're hanging out with us, as in myself and the person I'm interviewing. There are so many podcasts I listen to where someone says something, I'm driving in my car, and I'm like, oh, I wish I could say something, or I actually do respond to a question or be like, oh, that's bullshit or whatever. I want you to have those responses as well. I want you to feel like, oh, Ray, that's so stupid you said that. You should have asked this question. Or, oh, I totally agree with you. I want you to have those sort of reactions, because, that way it makes us weirdly connected. And for the people who obviously take the next step and, email the show or, tweet at us or whatever, that just brings us that much closer. And obviously, with how fractured our world is at this point, it's nice to have those connections. So, anyways, enough of me. I apologize. Like I said, there's been a lot in my mind, and I wanted to make sure that everybody was crystal clear on the way that, like I said, the thesis statement of the show. Billy Hamilton from Silverstein. Great dude. Known him for a very long time. And I was excited because he actually hit me up when he was coming out here for a wedding and said, I would love to be on the show because there's a lot of sort of transitions happening in my life that I feel like I want to talk about and, sort of put out there to the world. And I was really excited about it just because not only, like I said, Billy is a great person, but he's very intelligent about, the way he approaches his life and his experiences. And I was just excited to kind of all sort it out through him and with him. So here's the show. Enjoy, and I'll talk to you afterwards.
Right. In being right. Being able to keep that going.
Yeah. And like to be able to sustain the sort of like, because no matter what stage you're in within a band, your life, whatever, it's all about finding that place and then trying to make that last as long as you possibly can. And then once you find out, or once you maybe have the wisdom to recognize that, like if it isn't sustaining, to be able to either find how to transition out of that or find how to, adjust your expectations.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And to be able to be like, okay, like this is not where I expected to be at in my life, good or bad. But now I'm having to, move the sliding scale up and down to be like, okay, like this is where I expected to be at 30. Cause I don't know, whatever. People use those age mile markers. And it's like, oh, that's interesting. Like I'm not there, but I'm happy. Like I'm not bummed with the decisions I've made, or if I am.
And I'm not here as well. Like I'm not at the other end of that where you look at other people your age or, that haven't had the experiences. That's a big thing too. I know that with all the like reunions and stuff, that whole bit with like nostalgia, and you say that like you try to find a place and keep that going. Mm-hmm. That's like almost like it's almost backwards because I think about like what would have happened if my band broke up after our biggest record,
right?
Like, would we be coming back now and having people, or in 5 years from now, and having people like offer us more money to play shows because we went away? But then what have I done in those last like 6 years that I would have missed out on?
Totally.
There's a bunch of bands that just did a reunion in our hometown.
That was like For Our Life's Sake and stuff.
It was like For Our Life's Sake ended up playing the one show, but the big show was like Grade and
that's right.
Grade and Monine and the Full Blast.
Yep.
And I mean, like those are like my best friends and like my biggest
like influences
right. And peers and like the bands that we came up playing with. Mm-hmm. And I mean, like the show was amazing, and everyone in the province was talking about it for a few months, and like those people like don't give a shit about my band anymore,
Yeah.
But like, would I want to be there? Like, I went to the show and it was amazing, and I loved being a part of that,
right?
Because that's like.
But would you?
Would I trade what I've been through to have that like nostalgic? Mm-hmm. Success.
Right, to have that sort of moment. Because, and a lot of it too, like, because you look at bands like that who were honestly like forcefully had to transition out of their musical careers because it didn't sustain it from a financial standpoint. Sure. Where it's like, like, I mean, Monine was obviously sort of the whatever, the tail end before stuff was able to be, successful to where, you can make a living besides just living off of tour,
right?
Where it's like, oh yeah, I was able to come home and like, actually like be able to pay the rent for the past 3 months.
Yeah, exactly.
But like, great, like there's no fucking way.
Yeah, right.
They just had no. It was like, well, I mean, there's kind of money in this, but it's definitely, it's interesting to be able to be like, oh well, would I wanted to trade those positions?
Sure.
Yeah. Usually I like to start off with like either my own personal experience with you and just kind of like the memories that I have attached to it.
Yeah.
Where it's just like. from the first moment that I met you, it was one of those things where even though I had the only relationship I had with you was honestly Silverstein's first record, which I had no context for. So it's like right. You literally were just a band on Victory that sang and screamed. Like sure. that was to the extent of it. I really
and we were shoved down your throat. I'm sure.
Right. Like, for sure.
That point of Victory was like the samplers and the ads and the street team and everything was.
Totally.
Yeah, it was out there.
Was inundated. And so I honestly, I didn't have an opinion one way or the other in regards to like, if I thought you were, terrible, whatever. I was indifferent. It was just like, oh, Silverstein, like there's this band, it exists. But then obviously I remember meeting you at Chain Reaction, the Strike Anywhere show. And you just came up to me and just like threw it all out there. Yeah. And it was having that sort of like, honesty or ability to put yourself out there. Like, that's scary. Like, I mean, I don't care. Like, I mean, I don't care who you are or what level of work you respect a person for, or even just want to go up to somebody and say hi. Yeah. Like, even though we are in the scene and it's like, okay to do that. Like, you left an impression on me where I was just like, that's fucking cool. And sort of to be, like I said, to be able to put out like, yo, I liked your band. Like, we all like went to your shows and like kind of put it all in context for me. And I didn't feel weird about it. It wasn't like, who the fuck is this kid? But I was like, oh, like, I mean, from that point on where it was like, obviously once Taken didn't exist anymore, and then seeing the fact that it was like, okay, there's little strings that, there's little experiences that we have left in these places that we played, and it, sort of pulled on certain people. Yeah. And it was just, it kind of really made me think like, oh, wow, like, it did, this band did impact people in a positive way, and, we're never big, like, sure, obviously.
Yeah.
And so... But like I said, it just really impressed upon me, like, you putting yourself out there. And ever since then, like, anybody that I've run across that's been like, oh yeah, Bill, Bill Verstein, like, Bill from Silverstein, whatever. It was always like, a lot of people have the same experience with you, where it's like, you do just like go up to people like, yo, like, you're that person, right?
Yeah.
Like we were just talking about in the car. And it's like, did you, I don't know, like, you just have no fear for that?
I think that kind of ties in with my origin story.
Right. Which we're going to tap into.
Right. I mean, I think like I was always just a really excited kid.
Right.
I think I was a Punisher. Like I was, like I was that kid that went to shows that was like in the front row, and I was like wearing the t-shirt, and I was like taking photos.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to be everyone's friend. Like,
sure.
That's something that I think like throughout my childhood, like I always was just trying to fit in or to be a part of something.
Right.
And that's like something that like within the scene, I found like, I was like, wow, like this is somewhere like that I'm finally in,
Yeah.
And I think that's like largely a part of why I was in Silverstein. I mean, the guys will tell you the same, that like the band started and I went and saw them play a couple times. I knew Josh really well. He was playing in a ska band that I hung out with him a few times through that. And then same thing with that though. It was like I was like the only one at the show that like seemed to be having fun.
Right.
So then he came up to me after the show and was like, hey man, like, thanks a lot. Like, here's a copy of our demo,
Yeah.
And then Shane played in a punk band, same thing, that like, they all just kind of knew me as like that guy.
Right. Overly enthusiastic
due to the show. Exactly. And I'm sure, I mean, like, I'm sure once we met at Chain Reaction, in that context, like you remembered me as being that guy at the Taken show,
Yeah, of course.
In the front row, taking the photos, like singing along every word. And like, by no means was I like a talented musician. And like Silverstein had, like Bry from Wilhelm Scream playing bass before me. And he's like the best bass player in the world.
He's very technically proficient.
He is and like Shane had been playing music with him for 20 years or something. And he was just in like 5 bands at the time.
Yeah.
And so Silverstein was like, oh, we're looking for a bass player. And I was like, I like this band. Yeah, this is great.
Sure.
I got a bass. Like I can play, And then like the fact of the matter is that I couldn't. And they taught me the songs. And our first few shows were like I was like either super nervous or like super embarrassing. Like,
right.
I remember my first show ever. I think I told you this on the last podcast. I like knocked into the crowd and like knocked over my friend who had a broken leg.
Right. It's incredible. So, but you were just obviously so stoked to be there.
So excited, yeah. So and I think that like lived on. I think even through like the first few years that we were touring.
Yeah.
And I think like, I mean, something else that we can touch upon. I think that like got me and got our band some flack like for a while, like after we'd been successful, that like I was always just the guy that was like coming to shows and like people would be like, how's it going, man? And I'd be like, man, it's so good. Like we just went on tour and like we just played the show and we just like went to Europe and like everyone thought that I was like bragging.
Yeah.
When I was just like an excited guy that was like,
well, that's funny that you say that because I mean I think that there's always like, I don't know. I mean, people that make like cast judgments like that, I think they honestly just didn't know you. Like they didn't know. It's like these are maybe people you see like for 15 minutes at a show,
right?
And it's like getting to know a person at a show that's extremely difficult,
right?
And it's like unless you're actually spending some decent time away from that venue with that person, so it's like. But I could easily see the other side where people are just like, dude, that dude's fucking annoying. Like he's you're overly enthusiastically annoing, like because you're talking about all these small. You're like, this is fun, this is cool stuff.
But a part of it too is like I said, like I like wanted to be cool. Like I wanted these people to like be my friends.
Sure.
And so I wanted to impress them.
Yeah, that's true.
And I know that there like came a time where like we'd come back from touring for so long and like everyone in our town, all of our friends' bands were just like talking shit on us because like, and I like had heard specific stories where like someone's like, man, like I like talked to that guy and like all he did was like go on about how sweet his tour was or something. It's
right.
That's because I'm like, want to be excited about it,
and it wasn't from from like a selfish braggadocio.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean I was super young. Like I started touring when I was we signed to Victory and went on our first tour. Like I had just turned 18,
right?
So I was like 16 when I first started playing shows. So I mean I was very young going into that,
and I think anybody that can reflect on that time, like being in a band and like being in a band being in a touring band from the ages of like 16 to 22, you do a lot of learning, but I mean you're immature, you have no idea who you are, like at all, and like you're literally growing up in in the presence of obviously your band, but then in the context of all the bands that you tour with, and it's like they may be around the same age, but people are developing at different times, and it's definitely. I mean, I just was having a conversation over the weekend where it was like the idea of what your intentions are, maybe internally, but versus maybe how it's expressed. Then that's when shit goes wrong, where people are like, oh yeah, Bill's just bragging, like that's all. But you're just like, no, but I'm like, this is what I experienced. This was cool. I want you like me, and like I think that's the best place to start.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
So were you always like born and raised in the sort of Southern Ontario area?
I was born in Burlington, and lived there pretty much for 20 years. Was definitely like Burlington is like it's a suburban bubble.
Yeah,
as I kind of like to look back now.
Right.
And I mean, I was like born into a very like big house. My mom didn't work. My dad, made all the money. And
what did your dad do?
He did like construction and and he like had a carpet business for a long time.
Got it.
And so I didn't really have a relationship with my dad for when I was a kid, just because he was always so busy with work. He was never around.
Right.
My mom was raising us, and my dad was like paying the bills.
Yeah.
And then my parents got divorced when I was between kind of 7 and 10. They
That's when like the
went
process,
back. Went back and forth. It like started off. I went and I spent a year living up north in Collingwood, which is like 2 hours north of Toronto, with my grandparents.
Oh wow! So like, you have a younger brother?
I have an older brother and an older sister. Right. I'm the youngest in the family.
Okay.
So, and there was just kind of a day where my parents got into a fight and like the police came and we just had to kind of like grab our shit and leave.
Oh, geez.
And then we stayed up there for like 9 or 10 months, and then came back. And then like my for the next couple years, my like mom and dad were like, we'd be staying in the house, but my dad would kind of come and go.
Right.
And then they split, and my dad kind of like disappeared for a while, and his like company went under, and we kind of had to start from scratch.
Wow. Yeah. So you were living with your mom. Your dad would occasionally pop in.
Yeah. Right.
So essentially, you and your mom and it was both your brother and sister as well.
Right.
You guys were all essentially kind of starting over as a unit.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Did you have any comprehension? Because I mean, my parents were divorced when I was like 4. Like, so how was that like? Did you have a comprehension because like your older siblings were kind of like, yo, this is what's happening? And
kind of, yeah. I think I knew what was happening, and I had such an obscured relationship with my dad anyways, that it didn't really, like, it didn't not make sense. Like my mom had raised me, and I kind of knew that my dad wasn't there, and then when he was gone, it was like no real difference. And like I was like an awkward kid because of it, because like I wasn't playing sports. I didn't have like my dad.
Yeah.
Like I was like kind of like the kid without a dad, you know? And that was like weird for me, and that was hard for me making friends. That like put a big like target on me for like being picked on.
Right.
And like I said, I was always kind of just trying to find like a group to fit into, and I didn't.
Yeah.
I was kind of like an awkward, chubby kid. But I was always really enthusiastic, really excited, like really emotional.
Right.
And then, yeah, like my parents, you know, got divorced around like 8 or 10. I had a brother who's 3 years older than me. You know, he starts getting into high school. You know, and we were always into, like we got really into like Nirvana and stuff in like the early 90s. Smashing Pumpkins, like all that kind of grunge boom. But then that was all like stuff that was on the radio, so it was accessible. But then once he got into high school, he like really got into, you know, like NoFX and Operation Ivy. And
so he was kind of he discovered this stuff, and it started to like obviously filter down to you.
Yeah. And I mean, I used to like sneak into his room and like tape his tapes, and you know,
that's awesome.
And like the one thing that I did do was like I would like ride bikes with my friends, but none of my friends went to my school, so it was like all the friends that I had. I didn't have friends at school. I had friends like that I would hang out with on the weekends.
Did you go like to? I mean, you obviously went to different schools.
I went to a couple different schools was the thing too, because we had moved around because of the divorce. So I kind of had some friends, and then I had to leave. I went up to my grandparents, and then I came back, and they, you know, I was
you got yanked out.
I got yanked out a few times. I got like put into a different school because it was the school my brother was in, and my mom like could only afford to take us to one school.
Yeah.
So stuff like that. So I was kind of in and out of people's lives. And then, yeah, like around the time that my brother was going into high school, I was probably in like grade, you know, 6, 7, 8. I had kind of started kind of tugging on his coattails and following him around.
Yeah.
He hated that.
I can imagine. Yeah.
I had,
especially like a 3-year difference. Like it's like there's really weird. There has to be some dividing line where it's like, I feel that like, you know, if there's like maybe a year and a half between you and your sibling, like you kind of feel like you're a part of the same thing.
Right.
But then if it's like that 2 to 3 years, that's when it's like, dude, you're fucking annoying me. Like,
yeah, get out of here. So, and there was this really great program we were actually talking about it as a band the other day that was called Friday Night Live, and it was like the city would put on shows in the summer every Friday night. That was like at some kind of outdoor, like heavily supervised community park or community center or something, and local bands would play. And I kind of got tapped into like the local scene from that element, and then I knew that my brother was like going to shows. There's this place called the Yellow Submarine.
Okay.
And that he was going to shows at the Yellow Sub, and I went to see his band play, and I was kind of like, oh, this is like a whole new like rock club kind of place, and that's where I got kind of tapped into the local scene. Started like getting into bands like Grade and Jersey, and a bunch of the guys from Boys Night Out, they had a bunch of old bands, like Gym Class Joke was Connor's old band.
Okay.
And they were like, I saw them really early on, like I was probably in grade 8.
Mm-hmm.
Saw them in grade play at like a record store. And this was just like my first into like hardcore.
Right,
sure.
yeah.
And to local music. And that was where I saw like things like people didn't pick on me and they weren't judging me, and they like I just kind of fit into that. And then I took to that and took that back to high school, and I was like going to different high schools where there wasn't as many people that were involved in that.
Right.
One thing as well is I had moved into like the north side of town,
Mm-hmm.
And went to a Catholic school there, and everyone there like came from rich families that like played sports. They were like super into partying. We had like, I was from the south side of town, so I didn't know anyone, and I didn't like go to Catholic school all my life. It was just like in this one,
right?
And I just was just stuck at like a sore thumb to like how all these kids were raised. And like while I was like raised in that kind of privileged lifestyle, I had been removed from it for a few years at that point, that I just like was nothing like these people.
Right.
And at that point in like the music scene, I'd like got into like, I was 13 or 14, and I'd been like, oh, I guess like I think the thing too, my mom like did a really good job of keeping me out of trouble.
Okay.
She like kept me in a lot of like, clubs and programs.
Well, because it sounds like the way that you're describing yourself as a person, like you are like a type A typical case of a person that could easily fall into the wrong crowd.
Right.
Like just because you were so eager to obviously find something you could latch onto.
Yeah.
That like I said, you'd just be like, oh, cool. Like, here's marijuana. Boom. Heroin.
Yeah. Done. No, seriously. That's exactly. And that's like, I think I recognized that myself at such a young age. And then I got into the punk scene, and while I think my mom was even like, oh, like, he's getting into this like punk crowd.
Right,
like,
right.
We got to send him to Catholic school, so he has to wear a uniform. That's like what it was as well.
Yeah, I'm sure. And then with the fact that your mom obviously had yourself and 2 other siblings, like, she had her hands full. Like, what was she was working at the time then?
Yeah, and my mom did end up getting remarried when I was like 13 or 14. So I had this like new guy coming into my life as well, and he was getting me into my mom's my stepdad now. He's he played like professional lacrosse for years. So he was coaching lacrosse, so I started playing lacrosse, but I like had never really played sports like that. And
if you don't develop those sort of like, play baseball at age 7, like,
right.
Yeah, it's tough.
So I was kind of getting into that, and then I knew some kids from my lacrosse team that went to my school, but then once I got to school, they weren't my friends.
Right. They could interact with you in this context, but then once you crossed over, like,
totally. So I had a really just like traumatic high school experience, but at the same time too, through that, like the like going to shows on weekends was like my escape,
right? And
that is where I just fully like dove into.
Here's all my energy.
Yeah,
yeah.
Right.
I'm not putting anything. I'm not investing anything in high school.
Right.
Just because you were. And I mean, honestly, with you getting picked on, was it symptomatic of just like, yo, I'm a large kid, and that's kind of what's happening?
I was
like,
a target for sure. Yeah. And the thing is that all the people who picked on me, I tried to be their friend at some point. So
it was like that, like sort of from a victim abuse angle, where it was like, you get beat up, but then you're like, but I still like you. You're pretty cool. Like,
right.
I'd like to, like, what are you doing for lunch? And I could easily, I mean, you definitely see kids like that in high school, and like how they can obviously go down a road where it's just like, oh, like you lose yourself in that,
right.
Like whatever it is that you dive into, you lose yourself if it obviously is destructive. But
sure. So my last year of high school, I like ended up changing to a school that a lot of my friends went to, and having a finishing off in a better experience, getting more into kind of arts programs. Like they had like a lot of photography classes. I was into that kind of thing.
Right.
And I just paired that with going to shows, taking photos. I started making a zine. I was playing in the band, and I think that just like built my personality within the scene, as to like people that kind of knew me as like the village idiot started to like be like, man, this kid's like really got some heart, and he really cares, and he like really is a part of this and wants to be here, and like like I was contributing everything that I had to the scene.
Yeah. That's cool. And it's funny because it's like, I never knew like your mom was such an important part of your life, as far as like, the sort of central parent.
Yeah.
And it's like, you, I mean, there are a ton of similarities with like how you and I are in regards to just like, how emotional, like, like total heart in the sleeve. Like,
sure,
I will cry at a drop of a hat.
Right.
Like if it is something that's obviously, somewhat traumatic.
I actually, I cried like every single time.
Yeah.
Until I was like about 17, and I haven't cried since.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Was that, and that would, like, you cried, like, that's like literally the last time you can remember?
Yeah,
like,
I think, you know what, and I probably have cried since then, but the last time that I really remember crying was when I asked my parents if I could take off 2 weeks of high school to go on my first tour, and they said no. And I just started bawling, and I just didn't stop. And like, they were trying to calm me down, and I just wouldn't stop, and they like didn't understand how important it was to me that like I'm playing in a band and that we've been asked to like go to Halifax on tour.
Right.
And I just cried and cried and cried, and finally they like said I could go, and I just didn't stop crying. Like, I was just like, it took me like a week to calm down.
You had to like wind yourself down. That's funny.
And then I must have just like somehow shut it off.
Right. That was like the breaking point where it's just like, I got it all out.
Yeah.
And so the obviously as you started, so like Silverstein is technically your very first band?
Yeah, I mean, I was in 50 bands that never played shows, that had websites and had really bad names, and
what was the one that you, before Silverstein, what was the one that you were kind of most, I guess for lack of a better term, like proud of, in the sense of whether it was like what you were creating musically, or like, yo, like I mean, obviously it seems like every band you were like, this is the best thing ever.
Yeah.
But like, which one were you most proud of that you would obviously reveal the band name and sort of what you sounded like?
I mean, I could give you like 40 awful band names and like ideas, but then those bands had like 0 band practices.
Oh, okay.
I remember that I had a fake band for so long that wasn't like, we had a website, we had members, everyone played instruments, but we never actually got together.
Okay.
And that band was called Fat Bill's Revenge.
That's awesome.
And I was Fat Bill, and Fat Bill was my name on the like local message board.
Oh,
and,
okay.
Fat Bill, yeah, and it's actually funny because, like I said, like I kind of like developed a bit of a reputation as like being a guy that people liked after like people kind of thought I was a bit of a clown.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the first like big, like if you think of like the local message board like as like our personal like B9 board,
right? Of course.
One of the first like major like drama issues on that, some guys who ended up like, I still keep in touch with them these days.
Right.
Someone was like, man, like as a joke, like just what's with that Fat Bill guy? Like he's such an idiot. Like he wears that like stupid messenger bag. Like
right.
And then a bunch of like guys who were in like cool bands were like, hey man, like I like that guy. So like you shouldn't pick on it, And that just like caused, and then those guys' band thought that like the other guy's band wouldn't let them play shows anymore, and like turned into a huge thing.
It was like, you're either with Bill or you're against him.
Exactly. And I was like, okay, man, like I guess I like finally made some friends.
I guess I'm
like
part of something, whatever that may mean.
Yeah, that's like, that was my like kid from the Sandlot moment, like,
dude, that's a huge moment. Like when you had like, I that is interesting, where it's like you feel like the first time a person's like says something either complimentary or like kind of like, like you said, does stand up for you, you kind of like, oh, that's, and when you're not used to, I mean, I don't think anybody is used to compliments, it's like people don't know how to take it or whatever, but then when it's something genuine does happen, it's kind of like, oh, like that little light bulb goes off in your head, it's like, oh, that's nice, like I appreciate that.
But I had 2 bands that like only lasted like enough to play like a high school talent show.
Okay.
One was a ska band called Change of Pace.
Okay.
Not a Change of
Not
Pace.
Not right.
Because a Change of Pace was a band that came later.
Yeah.
And I was one of 2 singers. It was me and a girl.
Okay.
And we covered Real Big Fish at
that's huge.
At this and played some originals.
Okay.
And then we had another band called Day by Day.
Okay.
That are like, the guys from that band are like still some of my best friends, like that I've known for 15 years or whatever.
Yeah.
And we still like make jokes about having Day by Day like practice and reunion shows and stuff.
We should meet up and toss around some of the old songs.
So, but then like joining Silverstein was like very like I had no business being in a band.
Right. And so you joined that, like, was that your senior year that you?
I guess I was in like grade 10 or 11, so it would have been like my junior year.
Your junior year, okay, yeah.
And then the thing too is that a lot of the other guys had just either were just finishing high school or were actually already in college. And Rich, who was our original guitar player, had gone to school in Victoria.
Okay.
And I saw some of his like last shows. I mean, he played like 10 shows, and I saw some of his like last shows before going to school.
Right.
And that was when I first like got really into the band. I like bought the demo and the t-shirt.
Yeah.
And then he went away to school, and then he was coming back for Christmas, and you know, they had lined up some shows to play while he was home for Christmas. And that was when like Bry was going to be on tour with the Full Blast or one of his other bands.
Got it.
And they were like, oh, we need a bass player for these shows. And so that's when I got put into the mix. And it was one of those things where it just kind of happened too fast that like it was kind of like quicker to teach me the songs and get through it rather than like trying to, you know, they'd already put enough investment in like the 2 days that we had for me to learn the songs.
Yeah.
So did that, and then Rich went back to school, and then he kind of called us up one day and was just like, yeah guys, like I don't think I'm gonna come back. Like,
right. This is really tough to work out. And so you were obviously, once you were kind of bitten with this, like in high school, like you had no aspirations to really do anything besides like, this is what I want to do.
But it wasn't really I want to be in a band. Like I was never that kid that was like, I'm gonna be a musician when I grow up, because like those kids usually take like lessons, you know. Like I was just like, I want like to do anything that involves me like going to shows and being involved with music. Like I
creative.
I really took to music, but I never considered it a viable option for me.
Interesting.
And once I started playing in the band, I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. And then we got asked to go on tour. And then, like, next thing you know, I'm a professional musician and I'm, like, touring internationally, you know? Like,
right.
That it just all kind of happened, and I was never really prepared for it, and I never really had that expectation, I think, was the main thing.
And
I mean, so many people talk about it, how it's, like, a different vibe these days, and how new bands, like, have, you know, managers and gear endorsements and all this stuff before they, like, play a show.
Right.
But I really, like, did not think I was going to play music, like, you know.
You weren't. That I like how you put that, where it's just like, this wasn't something where it's like, you know, you saw a guitar when you were 2 years old and you're like, that's my dream. Like that's where I want to end up.
The kids say, I want to be a firefighter, I want to be a baseball player. I was never saying, I want to be a rock star.
I
did like jump around with hockey sticks pretending I was going to play guitar when I was a kid. But I didn't, like, once I got into the scene, I always saw myself on the side of like in the crowd, you know?
Yeah. That's cool. I think honestly, like that, I mean, I think that plays well into what, you know, obviously what we want to talk about in regards to, you know, like where you're at in your life and where, you know, this was a conversation I was having actually just this past weekend with like people like, you know, people in bands that are still existing, that have existed for a while, and people that are in bands currently that, you know, they're whatever in a level of stasis where they're not really going, like it's unclear what they're going to do next. But just having these conversations of like, okay, as you're, when you start to play independent music and you start to develop an identity where it's like you are, you know, I was Ray from Take It, and like, you know, you're Bill from Silverstein, and like you have these, you know,
Bill Verstein,
yes, exactly.
It has taken on its own form.
Exactly. It's been mashed together. But it's like, so you have this identity and it's formed, and it's obviously formed when everybody is trying to figure out what the hell they're doing. And it's like, you have this easy thing to plug in yourself to, whether it's like, you know, it is a band, or whether it's like, oh, I'm straight edge, I'm vegan, whatever. Like when you apply these labels to yourself. And then once you have to start sort of adapting to those labels in regards to like, okay, well, this is, you know, I will be known for something else after I'm done with this. Like, you know, because obviously, like you said, you were never, all right, I want to be in the Rolling Stones. Like, you knew there was an endpoint to this. Like, obviously, you've just because it was introduced to you at such an early age, you've never been able to like think beyond that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, that's a huge thing for me. And the last couple years, and more so the last couple months, have been like that, like, oh shit, like what, like I got to be an adult now, you know? And that I've been living like a teenager since I was a teenager, that now I'm 28 years old and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, and like what, you know, when is this going to end, and what happens when this ends, and like when is it supposed to end? And I think a lot of it too was like leading up to the like last few months, I guess, like even just till the beginning of this year, I think it got to a point where it was almost like am I supposed to know when this is going to be over, and like am I supposed to be prepared for this? Am I supposed to like is the band just going to break up, or like am I supposed to say stop? Like who's supposed to say stop, you know?
Yeah.
And I think I just got really scared a couple years ago, and I was like, man, like I don't really know how to do anything else. And then I started to think about like, well, what do I like to do, and what do I want to do? And like, you know, here's things that I've, you know, I used to run a zine, and I like have done some like very minimal writing on blogs and stuff, or you know, I'm interested in music in so many different ways, and I'm interested in like art in different ways. But is that something I would make a career out of? Like, would I want to like work at a magazine? Is that like even something that's going to exist in 5 years? You know? So yeah, that's been like a big thing. And I mean, there has been things. I told you I started working in a bar, which is like I haven't had a job like since I was in high school. I've been touring, and it's like you said, like making money. Like I've been making decent money being in a band, but like when you come home for 4 months to make a record, like I've certainly been making money from like touring, and like either the tour makes money or it doesn't, you know?
Right.
So when you come home for 4 months and like money's not coming in, and I'm just like hanging out, like spending money every day, like not that that's like I'm sure if I had planned my year better, then I could sustain myself.
It, sure.
But when I'm like coming home and not making money, like I'm like, man, like it would probably be good for me to get a job so I could like make some money while I'm at home, and not be out every night like because I'm bored otherwise. You know? Like, 'cause I'm home and I don't really know, like I don't really have any thing to fit into. You know, I don't have a girlfriend. I don't like have a family that like. I come home and I fit into some sort of normal life. And like, like guys in the band were like getting married and buying houses and like settling in that sort of way. And I was kind of like, you know what? I don't really have anything to fit into. And like I kind of was seeing someone for a few months towards the end of last year and the beginning of this year. And like that all kind of fell apart while I was on tour at the beginning of the year. And that just was even more of an eye opener that like, man, I really got to grow up one of these days, you know? Like,
well, I think a lot. I mean, I've equated this a lot in the podcast where it's like a lot of people don't understand that, like, you know, touring is a suspended state of animation. Yeah. Like you're put in this world that, you know, obviously you're existing in all these different cities for, you know, a very short period of time, and it's like life clearly goes on without you. Like, you know, when I say like when you're back, like home, whatever home is, like life will go on and continue if you're not there. Right. And so it's really hard to like have those things, whether it's like, you know, you're owning property or some sort of roots that could obviously connect you to what quote unquote real life is supposed to be. So it's like, I think that's interesting that it's like, obviously you saw everything that's happening, and like, you know, you want to feel connected. 'Cause like you said, you never were like, I can't wait to write musician on my customs form. Right. Like, because that was never like the plan, you know, the overall grand scheme, that it's like, you know, having a job at a bar, while it may sound unfulfilling to people who are just like, dude, I just want to play fucking music the rest of my life. Like, I remember not to interrupt, but like, I just remember one of the most interesting stories I always heard was like, you know, like Mastodon. It's like those dudes for the first 2 records, in between tours, like, I can't remember what member, but he would just go home and work at a bagel shop. Yeah. Like the bagel shop he worked at ever since he was like 17. And it's like, he did that because because maybe money was tight, like you were saying, and also to feel like, oh, like I'm returning back to this.
Yeah, that's exactly, and it's not even like I made more money last year than I've ever made. Yeah. And I like, that's not the thing. It's like more so that like, what is my purpose when I'm at home? What is and you know, you can only have so many going away parties and welcome home parties. Yeah. You know, it's one thing to like kind of come home and be like, oh, hey guys, I'm home, like, be my friend, like, let's hang out. Yeah. Like, I think that I'm like fortunate to have like some very great friends, and I have like really important people in my life that I see on a daily basis when I'm home.
Yeah.
But I have so many friends that like don't know when I'm home and gone, and they lose track. And I kind of have to like, I'll be like, oh, I'm home. Like, let's hang out. And they'll be like, oh, well, I got this and this and this and this and this.
Right.
Let's try and fit this. And I just hate to be that guy that's like always nagging on my friends to hang out.
Yeah.
So that was
no one. It's a huge line, because there are certain times where it's like that happens, and then people are so annoyed by you being like, dude, I'll fucking call you when I can hang out, and then you're just like, all right, whatever. And it just it causes that weird rift between one another.
Sure. And again, another thing that I thought about was like, what would I ever want to do if this was going to stop? And like something we talked about big on the last podcast I was on was, I'd started getting into beer. Yeah. And that kind of being a connoisseur was like something that I was like really excited in. And like, I, used my, interest in like record collecting to kind of collect beer and stuff like that. Right. And I think that's something that, I've always like loved vegan food, and I thought I was like, well, maybe I want to like open my own like bar or restaurant. And, I've been to like so many bars, so many restaurants. I've seen so much in the world, like that it should be easy to just like,
collect an experience,
bring that and put the best thing into a place that I feel like, needs that. But then I was like, wait, I don't know the first thing about working at a bar,
Yeah, you're like, I know the idea behind it, but I don't know how to.
So I started working at this place in Toronto called Sneaky D's. It's a pretty like it's a Toronto institution. It's been open for 25 years. Yep. They do shows there. It's like the place that everyone goes to get nachos after shows.
It's an amazing place.
And the staff there are my friends. The owners are my friends. It's a very flexible place for me to be like, oh, hey, I need, this weekend off because I'm, going to a wedding in LA, or I need this 2 weeks off because we're going to Southeast Asia to play a tour. Right. It's also a place too where like people that work there, a lot of them are artists and musicians and are doing things, and they're working, this serving job or bartending job is their like, main source of income. Right. And they're kind of saying to me like, oh, wait a minute, like you're in a band and you make money like living. Right. And this is not your like number one source of income. And I'm just like, yeah, like, I guess I like, I've been making money playing music for 10 years now or whatever. And I don't like, I want to be here because I want to learn what it takes to run a place and how that will influence my life as an adult, as opposed to just being that kid that like went on tour and grew up. Right. And then you're left with like you're left like we were talking about earlier, where it's like you're left without a quote unquote identity, where it's just like, I am known as this person, and then like once that entity stops existing, same thing can be said for a person with a job, and it's like, or an actor or an actress, where it's like, you see so many failed child actors and actresses, and it's like, because they can never transition out of that because they don't know how, it's either whatever, there's millions of circumstances that can prevent that. But once this entity stops to exist, what will I be comfortable to stand on and be known as? And and to be known as, like, even just like on a small microcosm, not to the fact that like, oh, once this band ends, that I need to start another band because that's all I know. Yeah, or I need to be a tech, or I need to do something to stay involved in the touring world. Totally. And that's like I think anybody that obviously does it for a prolonged period of time feels like they have to do that in order to be relevant or whatever. And it's like I look at my life and I look at like, it takes work to be involved. Mm-hmm. Like the older you get, the harder it is to pipe yourself into essentially youth culture. Right. And because I care about it in the same way that I know that you care about it, like we work for that. And like that's like, whereas other people, as they grow old and like you see people give up on whatever they're passionate about, because that is so much work. Like it's almost more work to be involved than it is to, well, I know that it's more work to be involved than it is to just be like, just cut off and disconnect and, go about your normal life. Right. And so it's funny that you're on the flip side of that, where you're just like, yeah, I'm working here because I want to be involved in this area. And like, there's other people who are just like, I would kill to be where you're at. Yeah. Right. But that's exactly it. And that too only makes me more appreciative of what
it gives you perspective.
Great opportunity. Exactly. That's exactly what it is. And that was my whole point in doing it. And while I think that all of this kind of came about this summer, like the like 7 to 10 months that we've been touring leading up to all this has been like some of the best, most, like I've been the most appreciative of the things we've got to do. You know, we played in like 30 countries this year, and that like I couldn't be more excited to like be like, oh yeah, I went to Russia, and like we went and there was like hundreds of kids at the show, and like we went and saw like the Kremlin, you know, like,
right. Well, yeah, it's funny because it's like whatever that saying that like youth is wasted on the young, where it's like, like I mean, I think people that obviously have a perspective in regards to like, you know, being in a band isn't my end game. And like you are able to experience these things and like be able to, you know, extract some enjoyment out of it. But it's like, if I were to be like, all right, Ray, if you could take your 30-year-old mentality and put it towards your 20-year-old self, like you said, you'd be able to be like, soak it in a little bit more.
Right.
I mean, whether or not that like that enjoyment would be heightened or not, whatever. I mean, that's hypothetical, but that's funny that you're like able to like enjoy that more.
The main thing too, I think, is that I don't think that like owning a bar or restaurant is my end game either.
Right.
And I don't think that that's like a plan B or a like it's just some sort of vehicle for me to grow up a little more, you know? Is that making these realizations and taking these steps gains me that perspective. Like I don't see the end of our band.
Right.
Like I'm like really excited for our new record and for our you know tours we have lined up and these kind of things, like more so than ever, because now I'm like, cool, like I don't have to like work till 4 a.m. at the bar, you know? It'll be cool to just like go back to, you know, Texas and like, you know?
Right. Like you said, it's like obviously like you lit up when I said perspective. Like, that's exactly what it all kind of joins up. And then one last thing I wanted to hit on before we sort of wrap things up, where it was like, I've always found this interesting about, you know, you and the rest of the band in regards to kind of what we were talking about, where it's like, yeah, we'd love to tour with these bands, but they don't like us. Like, and when I say don't like you, like, and not even like in a negative connotation, but just like two separate worlds. They don't understand where you're coming from.
I think what the thing is, it's like two separate worlds, but almost for them more than for us. Because the way that it is for us is it's like, man, like we love these bands and like we go see these bands. I guess like anyone who knows me and like goes to shows in Toronto, like if there's like 100 people at the show in Toronto, like I'm gonna be there, you know, like and whether that's a new band or an old band or whatever, like so there's all these bands that it's like, man, like I really feel like this band is like doing what Silverstein started to do 13 years ago. Like we were talking about La Dispute earlier, and it's just like that's like that like super emotional, super dynamic, like heavy and soft, like that's like what our band started as. And like I don't really, it's harder for me to see the difference of where they are and where we went or whatever, but that's definitely the place that we both came from, and I see that and they don't see that. And I think that's exactly what it is that we're somehow a part of something that they aren't a part of, and it's, I just use them as an example.
Oh no, for sure.
We're a part of something that they're not a part of and they don't want to be a part of. And not that I'm not grateful for what I'm a part of, because that's the thing too, is I don't want to be this like old jaded dude that's like, you know, oh, I hate the bands we tour with, and like I only want to like
I'd love to tour with like hot water music 24/7. Right.
You know what I mean? We toured with hot water music and no one came to the show. You know, like,
totally.
So it's definitely like and like I mean I referenced, I'll keep them nameless now, but like some bands that we've played shows with and that we've toured with, and like they are like sweet people. They're really like I have, you know, good times hanging out with these people, but it's almost like, man, we just come from not the same place, like and how are we here together now playing music, and like how does our music fit with this, and like, but that doesn't mean that I'm like not appreciative of being there and like
right.
that I'm
or
not
that
like,
you're
making the most of it and like
right.
having a great time with these guys. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
you're not. See that I really like that you said that, because you're not separating yourself from the experience. Like you're
right.
not looking at these bands, judging them, writing them off, and being like, whatever. Like they'll exist in their own kiddie world. They'll be done, whatever. All the jaded thoughts of like, oh, they'll be fucking done in 2 years, whatever. Like all those barriers that you can put up. You're able to just kind of, whatever, look at them as you're walking by and be like, okay, yeah, I can think that, but I'm not going to let that inhibit my experience, because like they are, like you said, they're sweet people. They have, and most importantly, I think they can look at a person like you or your experience and be able to see like, oh, like maybe they'll have a better understanding of where you came from, or like what a band that existed before them, like you'll give them that context of history, you know? And that's really important, that, sort of lead by example, where it's like, oh yeah, well, like this is how we are, this is what we've done, this is how we exist as a band. Because I think most bands want to exist for a long time.
Yeah.
and the fact that you guys have been able to do that, whether or not they know they look up to you, they probably are like, oh, that's an interesting, like that's an interesting way they've been able to sort of get to that goal or whatever.
For sure.
But yeah, that's funny. So just the idea of like, and I think every band gets to that point where they want to be part of a different scene, or just tour with different bands, but it's just like, oh, well, we're not on their radar, or like or that just doesn't happen. And sort of to wrap things up in a little somewhat nice and neat bow, the evolution as a person and an individual, and like we were saying, all these things that get either applied to by yourself or applied to you just based on like what it is that you do, and then now that you're moving forward kind of with a better perspective, and not so much like you said, a sort of oh shit moment where it's like you feel like you have some sort of semblance of like an idea of how your life will exist, without one or two things, because that's will always happen in life.
Right.
And so the sort of, the gratefulness that you have now, like, is it one of those things where, you're going to be able to apply that directly to, the band or whatever it is that you do besides that, because you have that perspective?
That's exactly what I'm going for.
Yeah.
I think, like exactly. And this kind of like shit hitting the fan, like oh shit moment, like is so much like deeper than we could even like scratch the surface on.
Right.
And there's like so much, like I feel like we've probably been talking for over an hour, and I feel like we could talk for 6.
Totally.
Like, and we talked about like all that family stuff. Like I like just started hanging out with my dad for like the first time in like 10 years.
Really?
And like that's a whole nother thing. That's like, man, like I've probably just like treated this in my mind as some sort of roadblock or some sort of problem or some reason that we don't have a relationship. And then like when he almost dies, and I'm like, man, like I really like should probably hang out with my dad.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then,
well, you need those moments.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And then to kind of be like, man, like I'm not a kid anymore, and I really have no beef. I have no like reason to like avoid this.
Right.
Like, and then now like I'm like actually really getting along with my dad, and like he's like really, really stoked. Like he's like really into like going to like NASCAR races in the States. He's got like a RV. So he's like, man, we gotta go like and I'm like, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Like, let's take things.
But then I'm thinking too, I'm like, oh, it'd be so awesome to like go to a NASCAR race with my dad, and then be able to like take him to some restaurant that I know from that part of the world. Like, to be able to say, okay, this is something you like. Well, here's something that I like,
right?
And be able to make a trip out of that.
Yeah, here's a shared experience.
But then again, you said too, like we're talking about this perspective thing, and like there's kind of a level that he's trying to kind of being like, oh well, like here's like what went wrong and why, like, and trying to explain, the ways that he wasn't involved in my life and give me reasoning for that. And it's almost just like, you know what, man, like we're cool.
We're past
like,
that, right?
Yeah, that's like, water under the bridge. And I don't want to sit here and like hash out why you weren't around when I was a kid. I want you to be around now, and I want to be your friend, and I want to relate to you, and I want it. And if anything, I want to use that as perspective as to how to not make the same mistake in my life, to like realize that like as a family, like I'm a product of you, and I know that I do things because that's I get that from you.
Right.
And I want to know how to avoid that or how to embrace that, you know?
Yeah.
And just like we've like hung out like 2 or 3 times and talked on the phone a bunch, and it's just like there's things that I'm just like so floored that I'm like, man, that's totally like that's, you know, my dad, and that's my heritage, and like I'm like William the Third, like,
right.
You know,
exactly.
So there's just so many things like that are now like getting over that like kind of childish mentality of like, oh, he wasn't around and I don't really have time for that drama now, has just been a growth for me as an adult to be like, you know what, like I can like get past that, and I can work on, you know, having some sort of a positive relationship.
Right. And like, and very much living in the moment and not letting previous baggage like hold you down.
Exactly. And a lot of it was like, I was so young, and it was like my, you know, stuff that had to do with my mom or stuff that had to do with my brother and sister, and them just kind of me getting the backlash of that, and me being like, you know what, I'm like on tour, I'm too busy for this, I don't have time, I don't have the headspace or the energy to worry about this, so I'm just gonna not.
Right.
But then to now be like, man, it's been that long, like shit, maybe I should give him a call, you know? Like,
right.
Yeah. And again, like how that puts a perspective and like makes me see the bigger picture of like what I've been lucky to do with my life and the places I've been. And he's been like, you know, I'm so proud of you because I haven't even thought of going to half these places.
Yeah.
And like, you know, you're like not even 30 years old and I'm 70, and like, you know, you've been all over the world.
Right.
So that's been like another great thing that was kind of all in like an oh shit moment that's now panning off and like, you know, going really well.
Yeah, so now that you like actually have a relationship and like you said, you're relating to him on like a human level as opposed to, you know, like the father and son archetype where it's like, this needs to exist, you've wronged me, I will not speak to you. And it's like, human relationships are complicated.
Sure.
Like there's so many nuances between the way that we interact with one another that it's so difficult to be able to quantify and measure them. Right. They will never, that'll never be able to be exist. Like that we will, you know, just because you felt that pull to be like, okay, like you almost died, I need you should be in my life. Like you feel that in your soul. And
even
like,
if I think at first it was like not even like you should be in my life. It's like there should, like I should be able to call you. And talk to you, and like whether or not we hang out once a week or once a year. And whether that means I want to like come to Christmas dinner, like I want to call you right now, so I'm going to pick up the phone and do that. Yeah, you know, and I did that.
Yeah, there's that is such a good feeling, because that's like my father passing, you know, a few years ago. It's like if there's one thing that I can point to that I miss the most, it's that. Yeah, it's the fact that you can pick up and call, and it's like, you know, whenever those cool things happen or you want advice or whatever, it's like that's. That when you see people that don't have those relationships, whether it be with your family or whether it be with like a friend that you can do that, I feel sad. I'm like, man, that sucks. Like I wish you had something. Right. And I mean, I've had people in my life, my mom, my stepdad, my like grandparents have always been there to you know, raise me and to be there for me. And I've taken so much from their influence that like, now, and for so long it was like, oh, I don't need that, and that's too much drama, and I don't have to worry. But now it's like there's no reason to not have that. Right. Totally. Like this and is for me to make up this like, you know, figment in my mind of this like person that I am, like that I should know more about that I don't, you know? Mm-hmm, yeah, sure. And because I definitely think it's a very inherent teenage experience where you're just like I'm a self-made person. Like, I know what I'm doing. And it's just like, well, no, you're fucking stupid. All this other shit's come before you. You need to pay attention to the fact that, like, you know, your parents had a very large influence on like who you are, and you need to recognize that. Right. But you're not able to recognize that until you like actually like, oh, I've seen something more than just, you know, like whatever is directly right in front of me at this moment. Right. Well, like you said, we could probably go on for another absolutely 7 hours, but thank you for wanting to do this. Yes. I appreciate it, and I hope you liked it.
Sweet, there you go. I love that conversation. Billy's such a good dude, and was very open and honest, and I love that. Anyways, visit propertyzack.com, and I hope everybody has a spectacular week, and come back next week for another exciting interview. And I have so many shows that I can't wait to show you guys. A bunch of stuff coming up. So have a safe week. Like I said, enjoy. Go out in the world. Go out in the sun. Do all those things that you've wanted to do. I don't know why I'm trying to be inspirational. But see you next week.